Hello and welcome to the Art of Carol. In this video I'm going to show you how I made 3 different pincushions. And I made these for my mom for her birthday and for Christmas. So I don't have them to show you here, but I have some photos that my dad took that you can look at the end of each section when I show you how I made them. And I also wanted to tell you that I got the idea for using sponges for my armchair pincushion from Pay It Forward on YouTube, who has an excellent tutorial on how to make an armchair pincushion, but I sort of altered it when I found some different sized sponges because I was going to do something a lot closer to her tutorial at first, but then I got an inspiration that took me to in another direction. And also using like what are you called? Not are they thumbtacks when they are like bigger, like big pins for using on a board and stuff like that. I got the idea from her to use that for the legs of the chair. Yeah, so that's I guess all the information I have to give you beforehand. So please enjoy the making of these pincushions. I started out with a glass jar I got from the dollar store and some cardboard from an old like tea box. And then I made a pattern using the lid of the jar to make 2 circles from the cardboard. And these are going to be used for the base of the middle of the flower. And then I'm going to make a pattern for the fabric portion, and I use that by just transferring the circle and then extending it to about twice the size. And then I cut out the pattern from my paper and cut it out of some fabric scraps I had. And then I'm sewing gathering stitches all the way around the circle and gather the circle up. And then I'm stuffing it with some just regular polyester stuffing. And I'm putting one of the pieces of cardboard in the bottom of my, I don't know what to call it, sort of cushion, to make it hold its circular shape the way I want it to. So after I've stuffed it as full as I want it to be, I draw together the fabric to secure the entire thing, and then I make some knots at the end of the strings. It takes a bit of fiddling to make everything look as it's supposed to, so you kind of have to just keep poking at it until you're satisfied. If you hear tinkling bells in the background, it's one of my cats. Yeah, so that's the middle portion of the flower. Then I'm just going to use the other circle I have to figure out how big of how big the petals are going to be. So I make a
pattern for that. And making sure to add some seam allowance. Yeah, have a chatty cat in the background right now. And then I'm cutting out all the petals from different scraps of fabric I have. This is a great scrap busting project, since you can use a lot of smaller scraps for this. And I just cut out as many petals as I felt like. I didn't really have a set number. I just used as many. I made as many petals as I had different scraps of fabric at the time. I mean different kinds of fabric, so it would be a bit more interesting. Yeah, and then I'm pinning my 2 petal pieces together and then stitching them. I'm just using the straight stitch around all the edges except from the part where it's going to be attached to the middle of the flower. And then I'm cutting down the seam allowance and turning my petals the right sides out. Then I'm ironing all my petals until they are flat and attaching them to the middle of the flower. And before this I had chosen which order I wanted them to be. I wanted it to be sort of cool tones every other and warm tones every other. So that's just the vague idea I was going for. It's kind of fun to watch all the different pieces of fabric and thinking about the projects I use that fabric on, like my constellation skirt and my comfy slacks and linings of different skirts and the waist tie for my chemise à la reine, and the fabric for my dressing gown and the cool 50s jacket. I hope my mother enjoys watching that when she uses it. And then I'm stitching on the petals to the base of like the middle of the flower. I probably should have looked up what it's called before recording this, I suppose, but I don't really have time for that. This video is running late as it is. Then I realized I needed to attach the petals a bit higher up. So I'm just pinning them down to keep them a bit in place, making sure no raw edges of the middle of the flower is going to stick out from underneath them, and then I'm hand stitching them to that middle. And this part where I was stitching all this was kind of tricky and hard to work, and I needed kind of a harder needle for it, like a thicker needle for it. And then I'm hot gluing the other piece of cardboard I had cut out to the bottom of the flower, and sort of reinforcing that stitching I had made, making sure that it's glued on really well. And then I'm gluing the base of the flower to the lid, and I needed that cardboard to make sure it would stick on there really well, because it was hard to press the flower to the lid. Then I'm hot gluing a ribbon around the edge of the lid. And this is also some fabric scraps I had. I tried to stick to my stash, and I got some stuff from my mom's stash as well, to just make it more personal, like stuff you already had for some reason or another. Yeah. And then I covered the ends of my my ribbon with a bow that I made by hot gluing the ribbon into the right shape. I was kind of running out of time. At this point, this was meant to be a birthday gift for my mom, and it was kind of getting close to the birthday, so I didn't have time to hand stitch all that, so I hot glued it. But I think it turned out lovely anyway. So then I hot glued the bow, the bow to the lid. Made sure it was stuck on it really secure, and removed all those really small hot glue strings. And then I tested the lid, and this is how the final result turned out. Then it was on to my mom's Christmas gifts, and I found these thinner sponges that I used for the back of the armchair and for the arms. And I cut out my pattern that I made out of these sponges using both scissors and what's it called? Box cutters, or just a box cutter. Yeah, and also I made the base of the chair out of the thinner. And so I'm cutting out the arms right now. And then I had the base out of a regular sponge, and then I also had like the cushion. I just removed the hard portion of the sponge, and I did the same for the back cushion later on, and apparently I didn't film that, but the back cushion is also a sponge with the hard part removed, but it is one of the thinner sponges. And here I realized I made the arm portions of the armchair too long, so I had to trim them down a bit. And that's how it's supposed to go together. And then I hot glued it into place, like the frame of it, the arms. Making sure they were really stuck on it, because it sort of wanted to seep in weirdly in the sponges. It was hard to press it together. And then I'm hot gluing the base to it as well. This was actually a really fun project that I really recommend, and the end result was super satisfying. The only thing is, if you're doing this, you might want to consider doing your pattern with a bit of negative ease. I did not do that. I just made it exactly the same dimensions, and it turned out, the cover turned out a bit loose, so I probably should have made it a bit more with a negative ease. And this fabric I got from my mom's stash, and I wanted to make a flowery arm cushion, and I didn't have any fabric, but she had some. So I had a bit of a hard time making lines that would be visible and like stay on, and since I hadn't added any seam allowance to my pattern, I wanted to be able to see the lines where I was going to stitch, so I had to go in with the printer pen and draw it out like that. But since it's not going to be worn like clothes, it's fine. So I cut out all my pieces. There's quite a lot of them, and I wanted to make sure that they all lined up right, so the flowers faced the right way. And I'm showing how I drew them out and cut them out now, because later on I'm just going to show you the beginning of me sewing all the pieces together, and I wanted to show you how the pieces were, because it's just a lot of back and forth between stitching and pinning and stitching and pinning and stitching and pinning it, and it just gets confusing, but I just stitched them together where it made sense, and I can't really explain it any better because it's so much sewing and the pieces are so small. It's kind of hard to see on the screen like this. So I just pinned and stitched where I thought it made sense. And here's some stitching, and it was kind of confusing while I was stitching. I had to make sure I really lined everything up as it was supposed to keep the notches I made aligned, and just make sure I didn't screw it up. The more I stitched, the more confusing it got. And then I trimmed the seams and all the loose threads, and then I stitched again, and then I repeated it over and over and over again. And as I said, you can't see it very well, and I was kind of stressed when I did it, so I didn't film it very well. Maybe sometime in the future I could make an actual pattern that I could share and make a more decent instructions on how to do it. Here I'm pulling on the cover of the armchair, and as you can see, it was a bit loose. I should have been more careful with making some more negative ease, but the end result is quite lovely in its way, so it wasn't so bad. Yeah, and that is the cushion that I made. Yeah, and then I'm just folding up the bottom. I left some extra fabric there, so I could just pull it taut and pin it down. And then I stitched down the fabric underneath the armchair. And yeah, it was kind of difficult to work with the hard side of the sponge underneath. But as you can see, it turned out nicely. Then I stitched the pieces for the cushion you saw earlier. It's not all these clips are in order that I actually sewed them, but I tried to show them in a way that's much more easier to follow, because I jumped between project and stuff and different parts of this project depending on what was easier for me at the time, but it's not the most easiest to follow when I do it like that. Then I trimmed the seams and put in the cushion and realized, oh, I need to sew it in at the sides at the bottom as well. So I marked that out and I drew some diagonal lines. As you can see, I measured so the markings ended up the right places, and then I drew my lines. And if I do this again, I can just fix this in my pattern later on, so it makes more sense. But since this was an experiment and the first time I did it, I wasn't quite sure what I was doing. But that can be really fun. But I was doing this with a bit of a time crunch as well, so the armchair took longer than I thought it would. But when I got started on it, and really got into it, I sort of just yeah, I forgot to film some stuff and things like that because I was so into the project. It was really fun. So after I'd stitched those diagonal lines, the cushion fit much more nicely inside of the cover, and this is how it looks like. Then I realized I needed a cushion for the back of the armchair, so I drew that out on my fabric and stitched it together. Yeah, as you can see, I had missed filming some stuff there when I stitched it together, so you just see the last part I stitched. And that's because I was just on a time crunch and really into the project, so it was hard to remember filming. But I hope you find it interesting anyway. And then I did the stitching. And then I trimmed my seam allowances and the corners and all the loose threads and stuff like that, and turned it right side out, and then I put in the back cushion, and that again was one of the thinner sponges that I removed the hard part of the sponge from. Then I folded in the seam allowance at one end of it that I had to leave open for inserting the sponge, and then I pinned it down. And then I hand stitched that last seam of the cushion. Then I could cut out a square or like a rectangle out of some pink felt, because pink is my mom's favorite color, I think, right now. Or she really likes it anyway. And then I just hot glued on the cushion and the felt and both I was covering raw seams, so just a lot of hot glue. Yeah, and I had to trim it down to make sure it wasn't sticking out on the sides. I think this also was something I watched in that YouTube video I got a lot of inspiration from. Then I hot glued on the back cushion and had to decide how high up I was willing to hot glue it. If I went too high up, I thought it wouldn't look very realistic, so yeah. Then I used some glue on the pins and put them in. I found these ball pins. I couldn't find any classic pins, but I used these ones, like map pins. Is that what they are called? I don't know. But I had to use an awl to make the holes for them, and then I put them in and then let the glue dry. Then I realized I needed to stitch down the felt, so I used I think it's called a blanket stitch, all the way around the felt to keep it secure to the armchair. And then I cut out some pillow pieces out of some cotton sateen, which is funny enough a pillow cover, some scraps from a pillow cover. Yeah, and then I stitched around it, leaving a gap for inserting some batting, or like no, not batting, some stuffing. And I trimmed the seam allowance and turned it right side out. Sorry if you can hear squeaking doors and stuff in the background. My neighbor is going in and out of his apartment. I think he's about to move out, so I think that's why. Yeah, and then I'm stuffing the pillow, and then I'm sewing up that gap I left open for stuffing. And these decorative additions for the armchair really made a big difference for the look of it, I think. Then I had some scrap of flannel that I turned in the raw edge and made a blanket stitch all around to make it look like a blanket. And that was the best fabric I had for that right then. In hindsight, I would have used some other fabric, I think, but I think it worked. It was sort of a last minute addition. Then I'm trying to figure out how I want to place the blanket. And the pillow. And then this is the final result. Now this was a quick one. I found this lonely cup and saucer that was once upon a time part of a set, but this one was the only one left. And then I hot glued the cup to the saucer, cut out a circle of fabric with a sort of similar flower pattern. I tried to keep it in the same sort of look, and I like that the fabric is sort of the same look as milky tea. So when I put it in the teacup, it sort of reminds me of tea, but with flowers on it. And then yeah, you saw me doing hand gatherers, and then I stuffed it with some stuffing and tested it out, realized it was too small, made a sort of a template for where I wanted it to be placed in the cup, and yeah, this is one of those where I missed some of the filming. Then I cut out a circle base for my sort of teacup insert, and then I stuffed it properly. And I put in the base, once again cut out of an tea box. Then I checked that I could put pins in it, and it worked. And I kind of like that it's smaller than the teacup, so that if you miss putting in a pin, it sort of just falls within the cup, and that was quite lovely. Yeah, and I'm missing some footage here, but I just made it the same as I did the middle of the flower. I cut out the second part of cardboard and glued it to the bottom of my fabric cushion, and then I glued all of that to the middle of the teacup, and this is the end result.
And that's all I have to show you. I hope you enjoyed watching me make these pincushions, and that it might be helpful for you in the future if you want to make something similar or exactly the same. I don't really have anything else to share, so thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. And if you want to see more of my videos in the future, you may want to subscribe and hit the notification bell. May the stars shine upon your faces and have a glorious day. Thank you, and goodbye for now.